Which is why if we had good recording equipment and took this like GSA, I'd just be sitting there until 4:30.
Why the fuck would we take this to GSA?
Why would we take it?
I don't know.
We're gonna. You think we're gonna
Wait,
do
you're
a
suggesting like
fucking
a
panel?
GSA panel show? What the hell?
Actually, that'd be kind of cool.
It would be
No,
cool.
do you know what the worst thing
that's
is? If we
wishful
got
fulfillment
online-
right there.
That
It
is
ain't never gonna
super
happen.
wishful.
No,
thinking,
here's
yeah.
the worst thing, right? It's like, it's the internet, so it'd be a bunch of people like, who are these guys? And then a ton of men that just want to meet you because you're online and you're a woman.
People who are not actually members of GSA but became members just specifically.
Like, can I touch you? I just, just
Well-
one picture.
Guess what? We just helped the membership drive.
That does. Well, they don't hear this part.
Especially if you
anymore,
bring
so.
your bodices.
well,
Are
they
you sure?
They can. It all depends on how I edit it.
Please don't put this in.
That's okay. Look, they've been jerks
If you
to
do
me
anything for
consistently.
me, Curtis, please don't put this in.
I feel like that's the point that the intro song should start. So now that we've gotten a little bit of levity into the system, James, you want to start us off? Or not, whatever.
Don't we need our like 5 seconds for the...
All right.
Start us!
Just looking at it going on, like,
Okay, this is going to be one of those days.
So has anybody actually read the paper?
Nope.
Yes, I looked at the picture. I mean, of course I read the paper. I was the one that sent it to everyone. Hi, guys. Welcome to Paleo After Dark podcast. I'm James.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Randall.
I don't know why I'm here. I'm Kurt.
You're a bum.
And we've got Paula here being General Dog's Body.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. She's over the couch looking with just eyes. All I see of her is eyes now.
Uh-huh.
Bear winch.
Stop abusing Paula or Randall.
Yeah, she might not
No.
come back.
So, same general disclaimers. None of what we say is endorsed or are the views of the University of Kansas. We're not going to be PG, so if you're easily offended, turn off now.
Go fuck yourself.
See, you should have turned off right then. Randall, oh, by the way, if anyone listened to last week's podcast, Randall has been drinking, so this time he should be slightly more
Yeah.
verbose.
Whereas I'm on tea because I am still recovering from gut pain.
And I'm actually here instead of being snowed in with my parents.
Yeah,
There
so-
wasn't any snow on the road last week.
There was a
There
lot of
was-
snow
there
on
was
the
when we
last
did
This
one.
it.
was
Don't
2
you remember-
weeks ago, Randall, remember? How much did you drink that day?
Don't you?
Nothing.
There was like whiteout conditions, and I picked up James early.
night before?
Yeah, never mind.
Anyway, so
It's all a
today,
fog.
All your life is just one big fog, Randall.
It's just one big dream.
Oh, this is Inception? This is a podcast inside your head?
No.
he's going to wake up and have the idea to do a shitty podcast.
I'm just singing Muddy Water.
Anyway, after that.
So today is theoretically might be a tad shorter. However, we're probably just going to go on longer, so we'll see.
Yeah, we only have one paper to talk about
Yeah,
this week.
allegedly.
And I have research to do, so hooray.
Everyone's
Allegedly.
got research to do.
It's not alleged. I get to go out to a farm and play with chickens. It's the best research ever.
No.
So wait, so
Shut
you
up,
just
James.
play with them? You like teach
Well,
them
essentially
tricks?
what I do is I put the tray in the little pen, and then I walk away, and I watch the chickens, and I go, "Hi, chicken!" And then the chickens go and they walk through the tray, and it's loads of fun, and I don't actually do anything.
So
And for once,
out
she
of
gets to interact with her peers.
I'm saying, for out of curiosity, by saying "hi chickens," are you actually changing the results? Is that
I'm
something
pretty
you have to
sure it's
control?
high chickens.
Oh, hi chickens, right?
Yes,
right,
it's
sorry.
spelled with an O.
Hi chickens.
Not in this respect, because chickens are domesticated, and so they don't really care. I mean, if I was doing an actual experiment where, like I'd like to do in the future,
Wait, look, you might want to rephrase that. Doing an actual experiment as
an
opposed
actual behavioral experiment. Let me classify that. Like what I'd like to do in the future is take it out to like the Great Lakes or the Florida Gulf Coast or something, and set it out, and then walk away, far away, and not have any interaction with the birds, and get actual behavior
You just
recorded.
get a ton of photographs of a gator basking on it.
Hey, that's a result.
It is a result.
The
But
gator came because
this
there was
isn't-
easy food.
this isn't really so much about the behavior. It's more about sediment variation and stuff like that. But nobody wants to hear about that. It's not published yet. It's not even done yet. So we'll talk about that later.
So basically, it's prime nature paper material.
Yeah, right.
The key is it involves chickens. Chickens.
But it doesn't involve a T-Rex.
Oh, but it will do when Jack Horner reverses the DNA to get a T-Rex out of a chicken.
Wait, well, they have gotten the teeth out, changing Hox genes to get teeth out of birds.
Yeah, but
Birds
the
are
thing-
born with teeth when they are in the egg.
I know, but
But the thing
but it's a developmental thing, continuing to get them through ontogeny.
But the thing about that is you'll only go as far back as like Archaeopteryx. You're not going to
Why are you
reverse
blowing a
engineer.
perfectly good transition, Amanda?
Anyway, that's right, because we're talking about... Oh, right, sorry.
Bird
God damn
ontogeny
it.
today.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, no, we're talking about ontogeny in general. And that is our topic, I guess, of a sort, because the paper is talking about heterochrony in birds.
So, James, why don't you define what heterochrony is?
Okay. So everyone's going to have to make this much more simpler, because it's one of my pet little hobby horses.
Yeah, we'll try and beat you over the head with the hobby horse when we need to.
We'll do what we can.
Okay, so heterochrony is simply changes in timing of development. So basically, as an animal grows, it'll either grow quicker, or it'll take a longer time to reach sexual maturity, or it'll reach sexual maturity much quicker. And this changes what the adult morphology looks like. So the adult can change shape quite drastically. Animals change shape quite drastically as they grow. You see this in vertebrates. It's actually a lot easier, to my mind, in arthropods because they molt, and in between molts they don't really do a lot. But basically, if you change when they reach sexual maturity, characteristics that are lost in the adults might be present. The axolotl is a prime example of this.
I mean, just examples of change through development. I mean, when a baby is born, the baby has a massively oversized head compared to the rest of its body. And then due to the development time as the child is growing, various parts grow at different rates to sort of eventually get what looks like a human being.
Yeah.
Birds are another great example with this, because if you ever see a baby bird when it's born, especially things like birds of prey, the feet are comically oversized. So this is it's hysterical.
You mean
Same
like
in dogs.
clown feet?
Almost, yeah.
Okay.
And if you ever see like baby jacanas, their feet are and jacanas are the lily pad walker shorebirds. And so their feet are just enormous, just absolutely hysterically oversized. So that's another really good example of how body parts will be very different looking when, in proportion to the rest of the body, when the animal is young, and then they sort of grow into it almost.
And just throwing out more terminology, when a specific body part grows either at a different rate to the rest of the animal, we call that allometry, and you can get positive or negative allometry.
Thank you. I couldn't remember what that was called, and all I could think was alimony, and I'm like, that's not it.
Positive or negative alimony? Typically speaking, if you're giving alimony, it's negative alimony.
And if you're
But if you're
receiving
receiving
it's
it-
positive.
Yes, there you go.
Receiving is positive? James, shut
Do
up.
you know what alimony is, James?
Why would I?
Do they
Because you're
not
going to have
have...
to be paying it out.
I
in
know
a few
what
years.
it is. I know what it is. You see,
Fist bump.
no, in England it's very different. You see, when you get divorced, they pick a loser and that person is shot.
So you're saying that you don't want to get divorced in England?
Yeah.
Amanda, divorce him in England.
Ooh.
What? Hang on. Why do you assume I'd lose?
I would say two things about that. A, wants one of you to get shot. B, assumes you'd lose.
Hey, wait a minute. Now I'm not sure if that was a compliment or not.
Why was it ever a compliment? It was just a way to get James shot.
My point.
That's your compliment?
I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that.
So,
Well, whoever
not
loses, I
alimony,
win.
but
Allometry.
allometry.
Allometry. Can you break down the Greek in that?
Can we not?
No.
Allo means other,
Yeah, and metry means meters, like actual measurements.
so it's other changes in. This might be complete lies, by the way. Other.
Quite possibly. This might be one of those apocryphal moments.
This is where the marginal difference between being intelligent and being a con man. I think I can work this out. Might not be right, but I'm going to pretend I know.
Hey, James, I have a magic elixir that'll fix your stomach problems. $5.
Is it acid?
I can't give out the formula.
I cannot.
$5.
I can neither confirm nor deny that it is
Actually,
acid.
Randall,
Is it snake oil?
Randall would be the best.
Snake oil is actually more useful than. So the funny thing is, most of the people. The reason why we say snake oil is problematic. This was on QI. They said so way back in the day when they were peddling snake oil, all the other people who were peddling actual false cures would say it's not one of those snake oil sales. When snake oil actually has some medicinal properties, and everything that they were selling was shit.
That's funny.
To be fair, though, if you were to slick Randall's hair back and give him one of those, like
Stovepipe hats.
yeah, he would be an excellent snake oil salesman.
Come all to the famous Randall Wabine tinctures.
I mean, because you just
I can
know.
see
Put a little bit of goose back in your step.
I mean, because he'd have a cart. He'd have a cart. There'd be this steam engine on the cart. Didn't do anything. It just looked good.
Pure Mississippi mud water.
Okay, so he's not going to go for that one. He's going to go for the. Now, listen over here. You got this.
I call
Is
it.
anyone out here in the audience in need of some sort of healing?
It's just mud water. Just selling it as chocolate stout. No, seriously, this
it's a
tastes
cure-all.
It's a cure-all.
Drink and your problems go away.
I was going to say, I think most of those tinctures were probably alcohol-based anyway, so at least you felt something.
Yeah, that might be the UK thing because that's a product of the UK.
That's a product of the UK?
Yeah.
So yeah, a friend of ours was at a bar and raving about a double chocolate double stout. Admittedly,
from England.
From England. Admittedly, when he was
I kind of
drinking
figured
it,
that this was what you were talking about.
admittedly when he was drinking it, he hadn't eaten anything all day. So he was like, "This is bad. I need to get pizza." I'm like, "Yeah, you probably need to."
So, I mean, okay. So,
Allometry
on the-
would be a great thing to talk about.
yeah.
I thought we were talking about ontogeny.
No, we were talking about alimony and then you being a snake oil salesman, but allometry would be great to talk about.
What would be, I mean, if you were to be divorced and you had to list your profession as snake oil salesman, I mean, how do you think that would affect the court's opinion of you?
I'm assuming in England you'd be shot.
That's a pretty good hypothesis right
I
there.
don't think we sell
We could
snake oil
test
in
it.
England.
Although, to be fair,
There's no snakes.
wait, you're
Very
going to
few.
marry him so that you
So
can
you're-
divorce him?
No, Paula will marry him.
Amanda, don't bring the bear wench into
By
this.
the way, I like the fact that it took about 15 minutes for Amanda to dislike the idea of having to marry me.
No, trust me, I disliked it right at the start.
Who says you get a choice?
Oh, watch me.
And like a hyena, he pops all the filters.
Pretty sure I just need to provide my bank account details to your mother.
Oh man, I think I'm deaf in this ear now. He's gonna die. You killed him.
I didn't do anything.
With my final breath,
She's
I
gonna-
cursed you.
She's going to kill all of
James.
us in different ways.
Except,
no.
well, obviously,
I like
except
Paula.
for not,
Except
not
she's going to
Paula.
try to set you up with random men, apparently.
Anything so that I don't have to marry you.
See, that's the thing. So, Paul. Yeah, she's going to keep throwing you under the bus.
To be fair, like if this was the sample of the world population, I'm totally the best choice.
I'm immune to the pox.
We're going to stop this conversation right now before
Right,
this
I'm gonna
goes to
take-
an awkward
I'm
place.
going to take the fifth on this one.
A fifth of whiskey would probably help.
Oh, that's right. James is British and has no concept of.
Is that a baseball
anything.
thing?
No, pleading the fifth
Fifth.
is the Fifth Amendment. You don't
I,
have.
I
you-
refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me.
That's incriminating.
Shut up.
Yeah, this is the problem with pleading the fifth. Is every single time someone pleads the fifth, it usually means, oh, so you kind of guilty, right?
I plead the fifth.
Wait,
Why would you not testify if it's going to...
literally the fifth thing they changed the Constitution is, well, if you've done something, just don't tell anyone.
No, it's that you can't be forced to
incriminate
yourself. You can't lie under oath, so you can't say you didn't do it. But if you feel that
refuse
there's some
to
way that would
answer.
incriminate you, you can refuse to answer.
That's a really dumb tactic.
Well, here's the thing. It's a dumb tactic for them because it just looks bad, because why would you plead the fifth? But at the same time, if the situation is more complex and you feel that there's going to be a negative spin on it, even though you are innocent, there's reasons to plead the fifth.
Okay.
Because let's be honest, the media can take things and draw them into crazy, crazy levels because they need a story.
Yeah, true.
Very true. Anyway, Ontogeny.
Yeah, that had nothing to do with allometry, James.
So we're talking about ontogeny,
I guess.
and you're the expert on it.
So what's the definition of ontogeny, James?
We already
went
discussed
over
the
that.
definition of ontogeny. You've been drinking too much, Randall.
Randall, what do you think the definition of ontogeny is, Mr. Chemistry Man?
Fuck.
We're keeping that pause in there. God, I might have killed him now.
So anyway,
Everybody's just trying to kill me.
Pretty much, yeah.
the paper is on okay, somebody else say it apparently.
The paper.
Ontogenetic.
Thank you.
Changes in archosaur skulls, essentially.
Yes.
And then the implication in terms of birds.
Yeah. It's a cool study of how you might be able to get a transformational homology.
Yeah.
So what I'm referring to that is homologies are just characteristics of organisms that are shared because of common evolutionary ancestry. Typically what we're looking at usually Eldredge termed taxic homologies. Like bird wings are all taxic homologies. They all share the same homology. But the steps to getting a wing from different bones, that's a transformation from one thing to another. And so that's usually termed transformational homologies. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting with this ontogenetic stuff because with ontogeny, you can see how through, as we discussed, alimony, which is just differential growth changes, you can have certain things develop longer during a developmental cycle or develop shorter during a developmental cycle that allow you to get fairly wide plasticity of form.
Yeah. I mean, I know I talk about this a lot.
But you have not talked about this a lot on the podcast, just to every single one of us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of the opinion that the majority of novel morphologies that you get in the evolution of life are down to heterochronia at some level. Because it's much easier, considering that when you're looking at evolution, at the basic level, you're looking at changes in gene expression in some way. It's easier to get changes in gene expression in terms of tempo or length of development than it is in massive changes in morphology, because changes in morphology are more likely to be deleterious. It's like because you're looking at random mutations then, whereas if you're looking at changes in timing, it's easier to survive that.
Yeah, if there's a random gene in your development that says, hey, guess what, now you don't have a heart, you're not going to survive that. There are certain changes, once you get accidentally boxed in, when you've developed a structure, there's certain things that just aren't going to change, and if they do, it's probably going to be harmful to you.
I mean,
Are 5 digits versus the
early tetrapods,
Early
that
tetrapods-
does not have
20.
Yeah.
Well,
But early tetrapods did that. One species 5, next species 7, next species.
But I wonder
8.
if the 5 is necessarily being locked in because it can't change, or just for being deleterious, or if it's just locked in because it accidentally locked in.
You
I
get
think, I
could
think
just
in that case
accidentally
it's
locked in.
probably just accidentally locked in because, I mean, there are no implications, I would say, in the fossil record that early tetrapods had any that multiple what do you call it? Polydactyly
Yeah.
had any negative impact on early tetrapods. It's just more likely that whatever lineage went from the amphibians to reptilian, just likely had the 5 digits.
And I mean,
that's my guess anyway.
And what you're getting into here is concepts of developmental hardening, where you'd have a degree of plasticity early on in evolution, and then things would sort of harden up. But what I suspect you're probably getting with that is you might be getting a period where things sort of lock in, but you could just be seeing a founder effect of, as Amanda was saying, the survivor had this, and for some reason there was no variation after that point so much.
Yeah.
I mean,
Best
the
one
effect is the
out-competed
same.
all the others.
No, that's not what we're talking about at all.
And you still do see
Polydactyly.
thank you. I'm studying for my ornithology exam and I'm going
So,
over mating
can I
systems.
ask
All I
you-
can think of is polygamy.
I knew, you know what? That's why you don't want to get married, isn't it?
No! Dear God.
All right.
Because that's not the point. We see polydactyly popping up as a mutation.
Hello.
In plenty
And when
of,
I see the 6-fingered man, I will say,
Yes.
hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father.
Inigo Montoya.
Prepare to die.
Anyway,
I just want to
and-
ruin
and
you further,
don't-
Amanda. Think of polyploidy at the same time.
Polyploidy polygamy with polydactyls.
Anyway, so it's not necessarily.
Thank you, Mother Goose.
necessarily.
It's not necessarily.
It's not necessarily harmful. Because, I mean, you see these colonies of polydactyl cats on Hemingway's thing, mansion, land, whatever. And they're doing fine.
But at the same time, how much of... I mean, random changes like that may be a sign of inbreeding, and while that's fine now, extrapolate that out for a little bit. If they don't get gene flow...
The problem is that no matter what kind of founder effect you've got, you're going to have inbreeding. That's just a factor of the founder effect, and the only way you can get out of that is to thereby disperse and head to a different area, and then you'll get some kind of genetic change that will
or
help.
some sort of thing the thing that was separating in the first place disappears.
Right.
That's another option.
But the interesting in terms of digits is we've consistently seen a reduction since that. Additions are
Very
odd.
rare. Yes.
Additions
Yes.
are always considered error. Reductions can be like an evolutionary change.
Do you think that's
interesting
simple-
bias?
Yeah. General trend is to simplify.
Yeah, but do you think that's? I think that's potentially just backwards thinking.
reductionist.
That we're looking at it from the future and saying, well, there tends to be a trend of reduction and not a trend in addition. But we're looking at all the things that reduce because we don't have a lot of examples that have added. But it might just be happenstance.
It's true, but I would say since the Mesozoic, I know of very few lineages that have maintained over a long period of time additional digits.
It's true.
In terms of 6 or more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know of lineages, birds being one, that will happily reduce down to 3.
It's-
3 or 2
Yeah.
or if we're looking at
Is
seed.
it the first, third,
It's second,
and-
third, fourth.
Okay, second, third, fourth.
Yeah.
Well, that's... yes, but people still like to debate that.
Yes. Let's just say that embryologic studies have suggested that it's digits 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
Which the fossil record agreed with, but then they changed the embryological studies to agree with what they thought the fossil record
Which
said. But the
was
fossil
1,
record
2,
now
and
agrees
3.
with the original fossil original embryological studies, and
Yeah. Anyway.
It's all up to interpretation.
Yes. But yeah, in general, we do tend to see a trend towards reduction these days. Anyway.
But that's just looking at one thing. If you were then to say, look at human craniums.
Yes, indeed. There are obviously parts. Well, you could say that the same thing for avian craniums. Technically, birds have relatively large brains for their body
Well, that's
size.
actually something that, again, is getting into a good parallel between some previous studies on potentially human anatomy and this study of bird anatomy. So I know Verba's been a big proponent of this, but I don't think she was the original person to work on it. This notion that if you look at like a chimp baby, it looks much more similar to a human than an adult chimp. And this is potentially part of an issue of its heterochrony.
Yeah.
That the way that it develops, it spends very little time in its more
Juvenile.
juvenile
Humans being
stage.
more paedomorphic.
Yeah. So what does paedomorphic mean, right?
Right, exactly.
It's retention of the juvenile traits as one matures.
And
This
the
is
opposite to
opposite
this.
is to paramorphic,
Yeah.
where you get very rapid onset of adult character.
Well,
Well,
there are different subdivisions
different
of paramorphosis and paedomorphosis. All paramorphosis is generally exaggerated traits that you begin to see appearing in the adult stage.
Yeah. So getting back to this Verba study, if you're a study that Verba is at least a proponent of, and I think was on, the suggestion there is that if you were to take human beings, you would suggest that they're probably a very paedomorphic species, that we sort of stay longer within our development time in childhood.
Okay. And I think there are definitely paedomorphic traits in humans, but this is one of the big flaws you can fall into. Species are not paedomorphic or paramorphic.
Right.
Individual traits are. Humans have paedomorphic craniums, but the limb bones and the vertebral development is very paramorphic.
Right. That was
Yes.
that was an unfair reading. The thing about paedomorphosis and paramorphosis is all these things are happening at individual trait levels because it's all allometry. It's various parts growing at different rates.
But the decision, or at least the suggestion, that particular point is only something that's very recently been thrown into the discussion of human evolution.
Yes.
I mean, people have liked to suggest that paedomorphosis explains especially brain size and things like that. But it's, I mean, and in terms of the cranium, yes, pedomorphosis, larger brain, but the brain has to have developed paramorphically because the juvenile brain is not as developed as the adult.
Well, it's not even just the cranium; it's essentially the entire skull that is pediomorphic, though.
Yeah, it's aspects of the whole skull.
Smaller
It's the face,
jaw.
the fact that the
Face,
jaw
jaw.
doesn't shoot
Yeah.
as far outward. The brow is very different. So yeah, but the idea being that if you're developing longer at this time, you might be getting some of these characteristics.
And it's interesting in the bird paper where some of the very obvious traits which they suggest are pedomorphic developments in terms of the skull is your muzzle region, like the beak area, is much shorter in comparison to your basal archosaurs. The back of the skull is inflated. The orbits of the eyes are very large on the head compared to, in say, alligators.
Yeah.
And those are all hallmarks generally of at least invertebrates of pedomorphic development.
The only problem with that is how do you reconcile that with the really long-billed birds? Is that just a secondary
Well, this is it. Those
paramorphic trait?
exactly, and this is it. You get layers upon layers, and when you get a pedomorphic developer, once that's locked in, that's no longer pedomorphic. That's normal.
Yeah, you've established, for whatever lack of a term, a sort of basic plan that you're building off of afterwards. That you've established this body form of bird, and then you could paramorph certain things, you could pedomorph certain things, and you just establish a new ground set.
But the beak could be. There's what we term predisplacement. So the beak is when the embryo forms, the beak is already longer, and then it just grows as normal. Or you can have hypermorphosis, where the beak just grows very rapidly compared to the rest of the animal. I think those are the two that gets exaggerated characteristics more so. So there are, I think, each pedomorphosis and paramorphosis each have 3 subdivisions that can lead to the same things, but they're differences in either rate of change or onset of change, and they can interact differently to get very similar results, but the processes are intrinsically different in terms of gene expression and what's going on in development.
So most of the things that they talk about relate to skull morphology, correct? And,
Yes.
and this is an issue when you're dealing with birds, because in birds the body plan is so locked in because you need these specific requirements for flight. Really, the only things that are going to be changing in birds are skull morphology and foot morphology.
I mean, wing
Unless
shape doesn't
Wing
really,
shape
or
doesn't...
the ratio of bones.
The ratio
size.
of bones can change a little, but in general, you're looking at more or less locked in proportions. Obviously, the feather shape, the feather function is going to change unless you end up becoming flightless. That does happen, obviously. But it's important to remember that with birds, we're dealing with only minimal parts of the body that can really change in their development without major fundamental changes in lifestyle.
Okay. So the paper looks at morphologies of skulls and compares them to...
They do. There are a number of comparisons they do, and before we get into this, the one thing we should say about the paper is, while you could do this sort of study, it's almost not meaningful without an idea of how things are related.
True.
So a lot of their comparisons in terms of what's plesiomorphic they get from phylogenetic analysis, and they take existing analyses. So what they do is they've compared it to, I think specifically, they've done early theropods
Yes.
and early theropod-like dinosaurs, because people don't know exactly how the stem of the dinosaur lineage is
They also
is
state
doing.
in there that birds are theropod dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fine with that.
So they specifically look at coelophysis because there's the big ghost ranch bone bed with juveniles and adults. I don't think they do Herrerasaurus. There is something else.
James is right now picking up here.
They also look at alligator, which is pretty easy to do. The interesting thing, and this is another important point, when you're doing this sort of thing, the stage you're looking at can be very important. So when they're looking at the juvenile coelophysis, can I have a glass? Thank you. When they're looking at the coelophysis,
We're enjoying the fact that we have a beer wench today.
The trouble is, I ask her to do things, and I feel like I'm taking advantage. Like her job shouldn't be just to fetch me things.
Yeah, no, I agree. So you were talking about something.
Okay, thank you. Coke glass, really? No, it's okay. Cheers. Thanks. So when they're looking at the coelophysis, they're looking at a post-embryonic juvenile. So it's hatched from its egg, it's been growing a certain degree, and it's I don't know what this, but it's probably around the time of being a teenager. For the alligator, they're looking at embryonic alligators, so we're looking at either recently hatched or just prior to hatching. So you're looking at different stages, and this tells you something about the reading and development. If you assume that it works in a linear way, which is difficult for metamorphosis because it's literally rewinding the clock to some extent. But your ontogenetic stages, getting which ones you're looking at, are important.
So, would this have been a better study if they had looked at embryonic and juvenile, subadult, alligator, and adult?
You mean have
all
pre-decided what stages you're going to be looking at?
Yes,
I mean,
because
I guess what James is getting at is that the potential problem with that kind of stuff is that you might be showing embryonic characters in a later stage. You might be, depending on how all this stuff is working out.
Well, and also when you're looking at your alligator versus your fossil representative of the coelophysids, obviously we're very limited by what stages we can actually look at in the fossil record. So
we do have a few eggs of coelophysids, though. I think that we can get some non-developmented stage. I just know a lot
the
of
thing is that I don't know if the eggs have embryos preserved in them or not.
I know Ghost Ranch has a lot of just like death assemblages of massive types of coelophysids.
Oh yeah. But I don't know if there are any embryos from Ghost Ranch. I know they've been pulling embryonic stuff out of the Johol in China.
Okay.
Because I think it was there that they found an embryonic enantiornithine. But
don't they
I'm
usually
not
only find
familiar.
coelophysis in Ghost Ranch? Or
yes, that's the only known locality of coelophysis.
Yeah.
But
It's not too unusual. I mean, there's Scelidosaurus, which is an English genus of early ankylosaur. That's only known from what is probably a single herd that was swept out to sea.
Spinosaurus.
Yeah, well, Spinosaurus.
Silvosaurus. I mean, there's only one known, and it's from Kansas.
Oh, let's not forget about the lost fossil of Ultrasaurus.
Oh yeah. So, I don't know. That seems like it could be kind of an issue. I mean, if you're only going to be able to look at one stage in coelophysis, it stands to reason, to me at least, that you would want to look at the same stage in alligator and whatever birds you're
The trouble is telling what stage you're looking at. Unless you have the entire ontogenetic... We've got the same problem in arthropods. Unless you've got the entire ontogenetic series, you don't know exactly what stage it is. And it's harder when you've got continuous growth like you do in vertebrates. In arthropods, at least, you can... If you don't know how many molts it will go through, but because they will cluster, you can do a ratio comparison and start to see clusters and see where there's a gap.
Those clusters typically in arthropods are referred to as instars.
I'm not gonna argue with that statement, but it seems like you should have at least picked some juvenile stage of alligator, not just gone with embryonic.
Here's the thing. Looking at the study and looking at the massive amounts of supplementary material, I suspect what they've done is they've been comparing specifically with enantiornithine birds and modern birds. And with the alligator stuff, they probably have looked at subadults, but they've gone for the comparison where it overlays very nicely with your morphometric analysis of modern birds. And that's why, and what they're saying basically is that as you go back in time, your dinosaurs, the subadults, compare very nicely to birds, and if you go back to earlier archosaurs, you need to go into the embryos, and they're suggesting that there is a consistent pedomorphic trend
Well, it's
in
sort
at least
of like
skull
a
development.
pedomorphic train if you're going back through time like that.
In at least in skull development, and I think that is the thrust of what they're suggesting.
And it's an interesting idea because it's sort of, if it were true, it upturns a little bit of Haeckel's ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, because in this case you have ontogeny winding back your clock to make new forms.
This is the big problem with Haeckel's thing, and there's a paper on amphibians, and it's entitled "Ontogeny discombobulates phylogeny," because the moment you get pedomorphosis, you are literally winding back the evolutionary clock if you're going to look at it from
just
a
backing
rate
up
way.
a little bit, when Haeckel refers to ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, his assumption way back in the day was that if you look at like embryos of things that are breathing air, they show certain things that look like they have gills, and he suggested that the entire evolutionary history is always in your ontogeny. As you're growing, you're living through your various evolutionary stages. If pedomorphosis is causing these massive changes through time, then it's not really that perfect.
Also, fun fact about Haeckel is that he kind of doctored some of his figures.
Well,
just a little bit.
Yeah, Haeckel's data's. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, they weren't photographs. Second of all, if you look at 1,000 embryos, you're going to find one that shows what you want it to show. And he only figured 2 or 3. The interesting thing in terms of pedomorphosis is because Haeckel obviously assumed that there was a degree of evolution makes things more complex, makes things better, and it was almost an escalator type way of thinking.
Yeah, although I mean it's still in some ways not completely Lamarckian. It's more just along the lines that he's assuming that you are constantly leaving an imprint of what was there before.
Yeah, and he did not take into account the concept of early onset reproductive state leading to loss of adult characteristics, and this does wind things back. The interesting thing is, when you look at least invertebrate development, the hallmarks of pedomorphosis are quite constantly present. I mean, they think that the suggestion that vertebrates evolved at all is because there are these things called tunicates that have got a free-swimming larval form with a central nerval cord running down the middle, and then they attach to a substrate and turn into these sacks of goo with tentacles, and they literally just...
Do they have tentacles? I
Yeah.
thought they were just sacks of goo.
Well, I believe they have little tentacles they can grab.
papillae type things.
Oh, yeah.
And they sort of like digest their own nerve cord as they grow into adults. The suggestion is that if you look at your earliest basal vertebrates, basically they evolved from something like a tunicate that reached sexual maturity without entering its adult form.
Well, I mean, we have something similar, the lancelets, which are also sort of basal-looking things that have a notochord but don't evolve into that crazy blob-like thing.
They do bury themselves in the substrate, but other than that, that's about all they do.
Yeah,
so those are examples of what could potentially be earlier vertebrates, or chordates at least.
Yeah.
The interesting thing for this as well, from a evolutionary standpoint, is what both pedomorphosis and paramorphosis means in terms of your homology statements.
Oh, you mean as far as if you're going to be winding back your homology clock, like bringing back things that you would suggest could be ancestral, and suddenly they're uniquely derived because they're derived through pedomorphosis?
Yeah, and I'd suggest in a way it's almost harder to deal with because it's not as linear, but if you have ontogenetic stages, you can at least tell when your pedomorphic characters are homologous. I'd suggest paramorphosis is harder because you're looking at sometimes completely novel shapes.
Now, I'm not a cladist.
We're not talking about cladists here.
Okay,
This
fine.
isn't cladistics at
Sorry.
all. This is standard evolutionary biology.
Fine, never mind.
No, what's your question?
So, when you get into using phylogenetics in this manner, could pedomorphic traits create long branch attractions?
Yes.
Maybe. I think the thing is, it depends on how these pedomorphic traits are actually expressing themselves. Because, I mean, this is assuming, again, Haeckel's ontogeny. Weirdly enough, in order for pedomorphosis to actually do that, to really draw back perfectly, cause weird, like, ancestral characteristics to be rederived, it would require Haeckel's ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny to at least be partly true. Which... Maybe not. I'm assuming that
It's
for
case
some
by case scenario.
Case by case scenario. For a lot of situations, your pedomorphosis is probably going to create something that looks similar but is completely new, and you wouldn't code it as something that would be the same.
Well, what they've shown in amphibians is pedomorphic species form their own clade
Okay.
because you don't tend to code juvenile characters. And one of the things that people are looking at now
Is coding juvenile and then juvenile in adult and seeing whether or not that helps.
trying to incorporate juvenile characteristics in some way. This is something that I've been looking at of late. This is something a number of other people have also been looking at. And I think there are ways to deal with it. You just need to recognize it.
Yeah. I mean, in those extreme cases where you do get something that's basically like a larval form that is just an adult in the amphibians, that's an extreme case. Whereas compared to the situation with the birds, the bird head may look like an embryonic crocodile, but it doesn't really draw birds back morphologically. It's just a unique characteristic.
See, one thing I'd be very interested in is if you're looking at pedomorphosis, how does that affect our idea of a rate of evolution, where we suddenly think a character's appeared, but it actually evolved 120 million years ago? It's just this is the first time it's been retained in the adult.
That's entirely possible. I mean, if it is one of the things that is like creating some of these major innovations, playing around with development time allows you to plastically deform a lot of things and get major innovations. Mm-hmm. I mean, granted, it's probably, again, not going to be happening like instantaneously unless you're going for one crazy Gingrich hopeful monster.
Yeah, but I think the main thing to bear in mind as well is even if you're doing like you're a purely phonetic taxonomist, you're going to have exactly the same problems.
Oh, as far as dealing with pedomorphosis?
And homology statements and how this will affect how things are related to each other.
Well, I mean, basically, this study was an example. I used PCA and morphometrics, so it is sort of an example of phonetics. It's looking at similarity and then trying to use that similarity in a phylogenetic context by incorporating the phylogeny later. But the data is phonetic. Mm-hmm. So I think a combination of similarity studies like phonetics and phylogenetics, you can probably piece a lot of that together by comparing data back and forth. Mm-hmm. So we're going to take a break and we'll come back, maybe. Wouldn't. All right, we actually came back. So really quick, we have a question from the audience.
What's phonetics?
Into the microphone. Anyway, that's fine. We'll pick it up. Wondering what phonetics is. So yeah, we'll describe a little bit about what phonetics actually is. So when we're talking about a phonetic study, we're just talking about studies that look at similarities between individual species, and they're looking at specifically just rote morphological measurements. So it differs from phylogenetics, where you have an assumption of evolution. Phonetics is strictly looking at similarity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor.
Doctor. So, I kind of feel like we might have gone in a lot of different directions. Where does that paper end up, and why is that paper really interesting?
What's the point, James?
I mean, the paper essentially discusses, or the main point of the paper is talking about how you can see an ontogenetic trajectory in archosaurs, and how avian skull morphology is essentially just pedomorphic in relation to dinosaurs and cruritarsans.
So with their data, what they did is they took these principal component analyses to try and map out the theoretical morphospace, and they saw where things were clustering. And they saw that birds tended to cluster closely with also similar morphologies of crocodilian embryos and also juvenile archosaurs.
Mostly dinosaurs.
Juvenile dinosaurs. And so they're suggesting that this could be corroborating evidence for the fact that you have some sort of pedomorphic trend, a retention of these ontogenic traits through time that could explain these large-scale transformational homologies that explain how you get transfer from crocodile to bird, ultimately.
Yeah.
I'd like to see how this study would relate if you threw in all the crocodiliomorph skulls from the Jurassic.
Well, it'd be interesting, but I don't know if you have enough juvenile characteristics. I mean, when you get into a lot of dinosaurs, you mostly just have one specimen, as we discussed previously, like your Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus is what? Spinosaurus could be like a bunch of different...
Well, we don't know anymore because the skull was destroyed.
Well, the skull was destroyed.
They named a neotype. They have more, but they don't know it's the same species.
Yeah, exactly. They don't know exactly
But now
what
it is. Now, even if, irrespective of what the animal originally was, we now know what we're calling Spinosaurus aegypticus is. We just don't know if it's the original Spinosaurus aegypticus.
So a little bit of taxonomy here. Typically, when you're naming a species, you have a holotype specimen, which is a specimen that is going to be representative for comparison to make sure that you have another representative of that species. When bombs destroy your holotype specimen, you might need to get a new holotype, and when that happens, we just refer to it as a neotype. Getting even into this ridiculousness of naming things, typically you want to try and go to the same locality where you found the original holotype, and that material is referred to as topotype material.
Topotype. And then there's paratype, which is...
Paratype is material that was collected when the type was collected as well, and described when the...
when the
and
type is
named as
described.
paratype.
Yeah,
Yes.
it has to be named
Yes.
as paratype.
Just because it's figured alongside it does not make it a
And then there's
paratype.
lectotype. I can't remember which that one is.
Lectotype is when nobody named a type and you pick a type out of the suite of material that was originally presented.
Right, because the holotype system is like within the last 100 years, and even then, when it was first adopted, holotypes weren't always used consistently.
Yeah. The interesting thing as well is the holotypes that were named actually as type specimens in the early 1900s, but only exist as as drawings and woodcuts. They were never photographed properly.
Well,
Oh,
And
yeah.
they count. They count. But they should be restudied and refigured.
definitely. There's also a few instances. So typically nowadays in taxonomy, if you're naming a holotype, it's got to be in a museum collection, because if it's in a museum collection, then anyone can look at it, anyone can study it, and anyone can say whether or not it's wrong. And way back in the day, they were just in private collections.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of holotypes that who the fuck knows where they are.
Yep.
So anyway, getting into these ideas of ontogenetic study, it's a really cool. It's a really cool example, but I mean, there are certainly other organisms where we could be looking for these kind of things to explain bigger scenarios. I mean, definitely within trilobites, we at least think we have a general assessment of how a lot of these groups are evolving through time, based on these sort of paedomorphic or paramorphic characteristics, because we're able to look at some of these instars, as you discussed previously with the Eurypterid arthropods as well. An example at least that I can think of, which might be a similar case study to what's happening here with the birds, is there's a group of trilobites called the diphonans, where they have a very specifically weird tail, where the first segment of their tail is actually a thoracic segment. So this is going to require a little bit of explaining, but when a trilobite is growing through its ontogeny, it's creating its thoracic segments on the tail, and then they slough off onto the thorax, and that's how it continues to build up its thoracic segments.
Okay.
The interesting thing with the diphonans is it's a paedomorphic trait, because these things are building up on the tail and then they go to the thorax. This thing has a tail that's like any other chiroid trilobite, but it's stuck this one thoracic segment on there. It's failed to finish that final step, and so it's potentially a paedomorphic retention of this one juvenile characteristic. And it defines the entire group. I mean, granted, you're not getting as crazy of a morphological change as from a crocodile to a bird, but it's a start, and it's explaining how even smaller things can be these ontogenetic differences.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting question is, and no one's looked at this, if you have a generally paedomorphic characteristic, if you then extend development time paramorphically, does it re-express the old morphology?
Oh.
So you're elongating both your pedomorphosis and your paramorphosis.
Yeah.
So you just develop for ridiculous. Yeah. So this is something to talk about. Heterochrony. We discussed, retention of pedomorphic characteristics, but also just time of development. And this is actually something I wanted to get into when we were talking about humans, is the idea of the skull isn't really even so much that we're paedomorphic, but rather that we have extended certain times of development that are common in juvenile primates, but we've extended it for far longer in our cycle, in our developments, so that we express even more of these characteristics. So it's a paedomorphosis, but it's also sort of a paramorphosis, because we're still going beyond what the paedomorphic state is like, because we've developed it for far longer and gone into these crazy directions. Mm-hmm. And that's also why I think for a lot of these characteristics, for the most part, I don't see paedomorphosis necessarily pulling things down the tree all the time. I think it would be rare situations, and those situations would be similar to parallelism. Parallelism is where you get two characteristics that look exactly the same, but they're evolving independently, and they're probably the result of like a similar gene expression that's switching on and off.
Well, this is, as I said, one of the problems they found in amphibians is that paedomorphic species tend to clade together, group together. That's probably because independently they reduce development time, but because they've got the same ontogenetic trajectory, the adults then express the same characteristics, although they've done it independently.
Yeah, well, but that's also potentially, at least philosophically speaking, an issue of sampling. I mean, we didn't know it was a problem until we suddenly realized it's a problem. But because we're only sampling the adult characteristics, if we were to throw in juvenile characteristics, we might see these things don't necessarily, I mean, they might clade together. It might be that for whatever reason this paedomorphosis does form a clade, but it's entirely possible that it's been originating multiple times.
But-
and if we throw in juvenile characteristics, that will help bleed that out.
Yes, but that wouldn't necessarily work in the fossil record is the problem, because you have to be sure that what you're looking at are juveniles and juvenile characteristics, though.
Yeah.
That's another big problem, but this is why if you've got an ontogenetic stage, you can you can just start plotting them out and seeing when they end.
Right, but I mean the problem is that, and less so in arthropods and invertebrates, but the chance of you getting a vertebrate ontogenetic stage is a lot
It's true.
less. But I can see that in invertebrates, especially in arthropods, it would be a lot easier to get nice, clear ontogenetic.
Depends. Okay, it really depends on the group that you're talking about.
That's true. Okay, that's a fair point. I guess a good, like trilobites.
But even then, you're taking on faith. We find this larval stage. We find the adults. You're taking on faith that they're the same animal.
Well, to be fair, in the ideal circumstances, with some of these growth series, we can actually go, here's the formation of one thoracic segment, here's the formation of a second thoracic segment, and put them in line, and you can see what, for all intents and purposes, really does look like a clear trajectory.
Yeah.
There's probably some ambiguity in all of these, especially when we have multiple ontogenetic trajectories that are preserved in one area. Mm-hmm. But by and large, I'm fairly confident that we can at least get a good approximation on most of these things. Especially since with trilobites, this is a whole other can of worms, the whole holaspid stage.
Yeah.
So trilobite ontogenies are split into these various stages, and it's been suggested in some recent papers that some of those divisions might be far more human-made than are actually natural. But there does seem to be a point after which trilobites really do represent their adult forms, but are uniquely weird in some way before they eventually converge on adult morphology.
But just getting back quickly to Amanda's original point, I would qualify that this is not a problem unique to the fossil record. There are still many species of spiders that are being synonymized because they realize they've named the male and the female as separate species.
Or
when you find a single specimen from the Amazon rainforest and then you go back in 20 years' time and find out that it was a juvenile. It happens. Yeah.
That is a very good point.
Yeah, these sort of things, really, these are all sampling issues. And sampling in biology, I mean, you're always going to have errors. It's inevitable. And with the vertebrate stuff, ideally, a lot of your vertebrate data, you can probably incorporate some modern morphological data and also some modern genetics data to try and also help to get more information on what's going on.
If you're dealing with stuff in the modern.
Yes.
Here's the other slight interesting question. In terms of DNA, does anyone know if that will change through ontogeny as well? If you expect, because seeing as DNA...
Well, DNA hopefully doesn't change
I was
through...
saying,
No,
DNA
okay.
hopefully doesn't
Cancer is DNA changing through ontogeny.
No, I mean...
Cancer's just, too much growth of it.
No, it's DNA changing through ontogeny. You have enough deleterious mutations...
I mean,
So we're all cancer.
Well, no, because prions are actually just protein folding.
Continue. What do you mean by changing through ontogeny? Do you think paedomorphosis could have dramatic effects on the genome?
I mean, this is in some way a dumb question, but seeing as your DNA theoretically codes your phenotype, so your morphological stuff, I assume that all the data is there for your entire ontogenetic stage.
Oh, I mean, Hox genes are your developmental genes. They regulate your developmental stages. So yeah, a genetic manipulation of your Hox genes will affect your rates. Ideally.
Yeah.
Hopefully, or
in theory,
and hopefully wouldn't just shut everything down.
But does that mean that if you're to be pedomorphic, like if you were to genetically code your amphibians, do they still have the adult? Like the DNA for the adult characteristics, it just doesn't get that far, or is that gone?
That would be my guess. Is that yes, they still retain all of the genetic information, but the Hox genes just turn off.
Because you can deny the expression.
Because axolotls, which apparently are extinct in the wild.
No,
by the way,
I don't think so.
Like in the last couple of months,
Oh, that's really depressing.
probably mostly in pet stores now. But the axolotls, it's only certain populations or certain individuals that show the pedomorphic development into adults that look like juveniles.
That's true. If you put an axolotl into a certain situation, it will actually lose the gills and become a full adult.
Yeah, and if you were to treat it with certain gene therapies at the right stage, you could force it to be an adult, even if it was of the type that wouldn't have been.
Well, I mean, we're also getting to some elements of epigenetics, right? I mean, there is information that gets coded in the cell. There's also information that it gets imparted through environment. In most situations, it might go down one trajectory, but you can force ecophenotypic variations onto these things that aren't changes that are necessarily genetic in nature, but they are probably have a genetic basis, and that there is a blueprint for the possibility to go to this response.
Yeah, it's in the DNA, but why do we need to express this when we're not in an environment that needs it?
And this is an interesting thought for arthropods then. Seeing as we define arthropods based on growth based on molt stages, you can treat them with hormones and force them to molt before they would do normally. Well, and they tend to survive it.
This is also like birds and teeth, right? Like that kind of stuff. It's still, you can make genes that are there but don't do anything express.
But I mean, theoretically, this means that you, based on the fact that we base in stars on size, you could halve the time for molt stages. If this could just happen naturally, you're going to start. This comes back to, are your ontogenetic stages correlative?
Okay, so this is also potentially getting to there are examples of actual strict genetic malleability, like methylation of DNA. You can put cells in environments where their DNA is going to get methylated, which would change their genome. So yeah, you can have epigenetic effects that are affecting DNA, could potentially even affect germ cell line that's not at all being inherited necessarily. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not from inheritance, I should say.
I mean, and there are some arthropods that, given on the environment, will skip molt stages.
Okay.
It's weird, but and I mean, in horseshoe crabs now, they get to the juvenile stage and all they start doing is getting bigger and reducing the size of the spines. But the variation in adult sizes is because males will have there are within two or three numbers of molt stages to the last time they molt. So some males go through extra molt stages. Females are the same. You get no change necessarily in overall morphology, but that's why you get some that are bigger than the others. Okay. And then if you to add more or lock that in, that is then how in arthropods you would get pedomorphic or paramorphic changes.
So this might be one of those debates that just is more crazy than anything else. But thinking about, how should I put this? If given what we know about Hox genes and also development time, mm-hmm. Do you think that Gingrich's idea of a hopeful monster, a genetic mutation that creates a brand new innovation...
Gingrich or Goldschmidt?
Sorry, Goldschmidt, not Gingrich. Wow, okay, that was bad. Goldschmidt's idea of a hopeful monster, that a single genetic mutation could create something new. That was, I mean, he was ostracized for that. Do you think we're potentially revising the dislike of that notion?
Well, here's the thing. What do you consider a hopeful monster? I mean, back when you're looking at early life and everything hasn't had time to diverge, anything that is a more stepwise looking shift, you're going to consider weird.
I guess what I'm referring to is that the big issue
macromutation is what he was.
Yeah, the big issue with Gingrich was macromutation. That one mutation.
Not Gingrich.
Sorry, Gingrich. Goldschmidt. Why am I doing that? The big issue with Goldschmidt. Sorry, Gingrich. You were looking at fossil teeth and horses through time. That's very different.
Curtis apparently has a hard-on for Gingrich today.
Not really. I just am mixing my G's.
No, he has a hard-on for horses right now.
Well, I mean, they are just so majestic.
Oh my.
The way they run and the undulating.
You mean prance?
No, when they run. Just when they're... Anyway, so, Goldschmidt... I think I'm killing Randall again. See, he thought he had the upper hand, but now he's choking.
Flanks, quivering in the
quivering
morning
flanks.
breeze.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Look at the mane.
You do realize there's probably a subsection of the population that really does. They go for that.
Listenership just goes straight up and right back down.
Anyway,
why do you think centaurs were a thing?
That's true. There is
because Greeks and Romans, let's face it,
there's
really
potentially a cultural issue. I mean, in Japan, there's a lot of like octopus and sexual relationships
The
in classic.
fisherman's wife.
Yeah, there are certain for whatever reason there are certain bestiality elements to a lot of classical thought.
Do you know what? This is a conversation I never thought we'd have on this podcast.
Every
Why?
conversation
we just had this conversation a few days ago.
Anyway, Goldschmidt's Hopeful Monsters. Given what we know now about Hox genes, in a way, you could make a few very slight mutational changes that could have dramatic, almost macromutational effects.
Well, this is the thing. This is. I think we've discussed this before when we were talking about molecular analyses. There is a deep disconnect. Don't worry, keep an eye. There is a deep disconnect between your phenotype and your genotype, and sometimes you can get a lot of genetic mutation and very little morphological change, and small genetic changes can sometimes lead to quite large morphological change. I think the concept is not inherently wrong. I don't think it's a majority event, and I don't think it explains sudden rapid diversification.
Yeah, I think that's where Goldschmidt probably overplayed his hand substantially, but
Yeah.
I don't think that the idea is without merit
No,
to
I
some
think-
respect.
I think, like you said, there are certain situations where it could certainly occur, but it's not going to explain what we see in general, the appearance of new.
Well, and as we stated before, like you're dealing with development, and dealing with development is probably in a lot of ways similar to I suddenly have a mutation where I don't have a heart. I mean, there are very few ways that you can change it that aren't going to immediately kill you.
But at the same time, if you think of it this way, we all know what a frog is. We know what a frog looks like. If a tadpole was to have a mutation that mean it did not grow into a frog and it suddenly was able to reproduce sexually, we would have a sudden, completely new body plan in frogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because we know frogs and because we know they look like tadpoles, we'd be able to explain it. If we had the fossil record and suddenly you had frog, 4 limbs, hop, hop, then something with a tail and a mouth and genitals and nothing else, that would look really weird, and that would be Goldschmidtian, essentially, the way we'd have to interpret it.
I also have those weird macro mutations of frogs already.
Well, you're talking about
What-
multiple limbs,
Yeah.
though.
That's not really macromutation.
That's just
No, that's
shit
just
gets fucked up.
But
that's
that-
just
yeah. I
environment
think that's another
controls.
thing potentially is well, either you die or the thing is just deleterious. Like
There
a lot
was-
of Hox gene manipulations, we can manipulate fruit flies to have legs coming out of their eyes. That's not going to help.
A
anyone.
lamb was just born in the last week or two that had 5 legs.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it happens. These things, mistakes in development do happen. Every once in a while, they might be advantageous.
The difference is, I mean, that would be caught and eaten probably pretty quickly in the wild.
Tasty.
Wait, do you just want to eat a 5-legged lamb?
I like lamb.
Like
it's
the
tasty.
last buffalo.
What, you never had lamb chops, kid?
Oh man, you're right. You're getting an extra chop.
And ex-
Clearly, farmers should be breeding for
three
five-legged
three
lambs.
shank lamb.
3 shank lamb.
So you want the 8-legged calf to live?
So Paula
Yes.
is not looking happy.
Paula is a vegetarian. Paula is very upset at this conversation.
Sorry, Paula.
I'm sure it's living a very happy life on the farm in Iowa.
Yeah, no, it's a farm
isn't-
outside of
isn't-
Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Isn't that what happened to people's dogs when they're small children? He went to live on the farm, Billy.
That's what I told all
That's
my
when they
students
die.
happened to the crayfish that they were experimenting on. They went
When
to a
in
farm.
actuality, you had gumbo that night.
There was a massive bio gumbo fest, but yeah, I told them they went to a farm outside of Cincinnati
Nice.
where they got to play and roam and forage all day.
Nice.
So I think that's one of the big interesting is like, what do you term as macromutations? Are we talking about sudden random shifts in morphology caused by the direct thing, the genes that code it,
Yeah, I
or
mean-
developmental shifts that cause macromutation-like effects?
Yeah, I think what Goldschmidt was talking about was just you could get a few changes that would create like new. I mean, for lack of a better term, he probably would have said new phyla. Just completely new body plans, new shapes, new forms. Whereas this, not necessarily, that doesn't happen.
But heterochrony would create that like effect.
You can get very interesting, very distinct, and very prominent morphological change with very little, but very precisely placed genetic change. So, ontogeny. Does anybody else have anything else?
No.
I think that was a fairly interesting. I mean, we could go on forever.
Yeah,
But
ontogeny is one of those situations where we could talk forever, but we really
You're going to
only
just
brought-
end up bringing up more and more examples more than anything else.
We'll probably revisit the topic in the future.
We only had one paper, and
Yeah.
I think that the limits of one paper.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So I think that's it for this week. We hope you'll be back in a couple of weeks' time.
2 weeks.
What? You're gonna make a Better Off Dead joke? $2.
I thought he was going.
I was
for
going for
Zelda.
Total Recall.
Oh,
Oh.
okay. 2 weeks. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
You're drunk.
shouldn't you follow that up with Quaid? Get to the reactor core if that's what you're gonna really. Anyway,
See you at the body reactor.
so there we go. That's a good quote from Total Recall.
Stick around. So I've been James.
Stick around. Nice.
I've been
he's-
James.
Oh, he has been James.
He has, and this is Amanda.
Randall.
And this is Kurt.
And
And Bear Winch.
I don't think we could actually hear her because Randall was screaming beer wench. Bye.
I suspect you might get to a point where you literally have nothing to do for 6 months. And I don't think you realise that you're going to get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably, I'm gonna end up in the same boat that Curtis is in.
Well, no. Wait. You mean unemployed?
You mean a bum?
That too.